My name is Erin. Today we have Beth McMullin so you're with Sing currently, but you've got a very broad background. And what would you say your titles have been? Because I'm a jack them all up if I say them for you. So
So in general, I've worked in subjective evaluation and psychoacoustic research. So I've been an acoustic research engineer at most of the jobs that I've worked. After working in the studio, that was sort of a former life. But yeah.
right. So you worked in the studio. So I did my due diligence.
Mhm.
The first time that we talked, I think it was back in January. Well,
Mhm.
I can't remember for sure, but it was
Oh,
like it was a Sing thing, and I was like,
mhm.
man, this girl is wicked smart. Like, this is so cool to have a conversation and straight up nerd out, with somebody. And I could tell that you have a very strong passion for this. And then I was curious what your background is. So I went and looked, and I just all the stuff that you've done. You're on AES. Your LinkedIn is pretty awesome too, by the way. But
Thank you.
I also took note that you have I guess like a studio type background. I don't know the right way to
Mhm.
put that, but I thought that was cool because it does seem somewhat rare that, at least from the people that I've talked with in the audio industry, it does seem somewhat rare that they have an audio background, a musicianship
Mhm.
type background. Although there are some, but at least from the pool of people that I've talked with directly. So I thought that was cool. And you've been a professor at one point?
Yeah, I taught at the now defunct art institutes after I was in grad school. So I taught let's see, it was audio electronics. I taught a couple levels of audio electronics. So that was actually like circuit level, building little microphones and breadboarding
Yeah.
circuits. And that was a fantastic job. I really enjoyed doing that. It was awesome for a number of things. First of all, like just seeing the way that different people think, because you'd like ask them to breadboard a circuit and then you'd get back this just so many different ways of looking at the same problem.
Yeah.
But then also just, watching people learn and grow. And, I've gotten to see some of my former students in LA, like accidentally, since I worked there, because audio is such a small world, and it's just cool to see them grow up and evolve. And a lot of them have gone on to be like sound designers or work in podcasting or live sound. And
Hmm.
some of them are in studios. So it's kind of all over the map. But on that side of the industry, whereas I'm more on like consumer electronics now. Mhm.
Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. Yeah, the breadboarding thing. I've tried to do that before. I bought a little Arduino a few years ago. Well, it's been 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and I was following the instructions, and just stuff was all over the place. And I was
I
trying to
used to actually
code.
teach workshops in that too.
Did you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Well,
cool.
maybe you could teach me sometime because it was terrible. It was so bad. So I'm going to skip over straight to some hard stuff, right? So I did give you a
Right.
heads up that I was going to bring some of these up, but
Okay.
it doesn't have to be anything too serious. I kind of want to just keep it light and very informal, just kind of a chit chat. But I thought, so out of the three AES papers that are attributed to your name on the AES website, which, by the way, I'm going to throw this back up here. Um,
There are
by the
more.
way, are there more? Okay, there was the
Yeah, but
first
these
three
are
that I
these are the most
found.
recent ones. So, but
Oh, okay, okay.
Alan will love that you brought this one up. So, Alan
Oh,
Frontier.
cool. Yeah, well, I saw that when I was like, well, that's perfect because that's a conversation that I would like to have. We don't have to get in depth, but maybe just if you want to touch on a
Alan
little
would
bit.
love to
But
have that conversation. You should
yeah,
totally go
I'll
in depth on
definitely
both of them.
I'll ring him up sometime. And now that I am a member of the AES, which I literally just signed up for yesterday, so I could access your papers,
Nice.
I was like, I guess I'll go ahead and pay it. I've been avoiding it for the past number of years, and every once in a while I'll ask somebody I know, hey, do you mind just float me one? I won't give out names. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but
Nice.
it's kind of like sharing your Netflix password. Like every once in a while, hey, can you do me a favor? Um, but
I know
anyway,
some companies that did that for a long time. I won't mention names, but
okay,
yeah.
perfect, perfect. Well, I'm in good company, no pun intended.
Great.
The loudspeaker port designed for optimal performance and listening experience. Now, I read through this and I thought it was really cool. I guess, as far as measurements go and listening and things like that, what I see in a lot of measurements with poor performers is that there's strong vent resonances that just stand out. And it's always typically like 500 to about 1 kilohertz, depending on the enclosure size and things like that.
Mhm.
And until recently, when this Clipple and more anechoic data has started to become available, you didn't really see it because all we've had access to is just gated measurements. So you
Mhm.
basically smoothed out those strong resonances. And you try to correlate. Hey, I'm hearing something, but I'm not seeing the measurement. Well, that's why you weren't able to see it because you didn't have the resolution that you needed. But
Mhm.
now that we have that, now we're seeing these kind of resonances. I'm kind of curious. Do you have any tidbits that you might be interested in sharing, or just some thoughts on that paper at all?
On that paper, I pretty much did the subjective evaluation part. So I know,
Okay.
so Andre Bizzola, who's amazing. If you're interested in simulation stuff, he is like the COMSOL expert person to talk to when it comes to COMSOL and acoustics.
Okay.
So he did a lot of different simulations to try to come up with the optimal port tube design. So he and Alan went through and kind of formulated a couple different versions of this for different enclosures. I think there was like different ratios too. There was like a 3-to-1 and a 4-to-1 ratio versions that they evaluated, and then they 3D printed a whole bunch of different port tubes. So he went through and did measurements of these at very high volumes, and then we would basically go through and did some listening tests to sort of, although we had an idea of which ones were the best performers based off of the measurements. And that's kind of the important part that I've played a lot of the time is we get an idea of what should be correct through
Right.
measurement. And so Samsung has amazing facilities, great anechoic chambers. I was really lucky to work there for that. And so we'd get an idea through the measurements, and then we'd run listening tests to confirm those findings. So the best listening tests, you already kind of know what the answer is going to be. Sometimes you get surprised, but in general, you use the measurements. And then we went through and did, in that one, it was, we did a preference test, I think, with 5 different port tubes. So we had obviously a straight port tube. I think it was a straight port tube that had like a slight blend to it, and then 3 different sizes. And the sizes are all in the paper, and it, depends on the box and everything. So it's specific
Right.
to that particular, but it gave us a good idea of like how much flare you needed in the port tube. And so
Right.
there actually was an optimal flare. And if you got that optimal flare level, you could get up to, I think it was 3 dB higher in volume compared to one that wasn't optimally flared without hearing this really audible chuffing and noise. In terms of the material use, because everybody was curious about that, like, okay, what you use for sounds. I remember we like went through and actually like intentionally, I think I was like on a synthesizer just picking out like different kick
Oh,
drums and
tones.
things like
Oh,
that
okay. That's
that were
awesome.
close to, creating that port noise and tuning it so it would intentionally make those noises. And then we made recordings of that at different levels. So it was like at different voltages, and yeah, just comparing which ones were the worst. And there was an optimal port in that one that turned out to be much better. I'd have to like look over my notes. I think it was the one in the middle. It was 59 millimeters. So
Okay.
yeah, and that was, I
Yeah,
think, the
and
center. Yeah. Mhm.
well, and for what it's
Um,
worth, if for the people watching this particular paper is, they say it's open access, so I guess think anybody can just go and download it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Samsung was pretty good about that. I think most of our papers were open access. And then the second part of the listening test, we did a method of adjustment test. So we basically had a reference of like one that was just starting to make noise, I think, and then you had to
Okay.
adjust the other ones to meet that noise level. So that was kind of interesting to see that obviously the straight port tubes performed horribly, and were chuffing and making noises even at very low voltages. And then the better designed ones, you had to get to a much higher level. So specifics, of
Okay.
course, are all in the paper, and there's also some really detailed stuff from Andre going through the simulations that he did to come to those uh, that. And also the background stuff is all Alan Devantier from work he did in like the early 2000s when he was at Harman.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was I kind of glanced through that because I was supposed to be working, and I was like, I got to read this on my phone real fast. Okay, this is cool. So I was like, I want to ask about this one. So you mentioned the port chuffing, and I was talking about the mid range resonance. Did y'all ever get into that? Was that
Um,
an issue
we
as
were
far as like a?
mostly in that paper, we're mostly looking at just noise issues.
Okay.
So it was like when, like how loud could you get the port
Yeah.
tube to be without getting distortions and chuffing and weird noises.
Oh,
So
was that more like lower in frequency, or was it low
mhm.
to mid band? Okay.
It was mostly
Okay.
lower in frequency. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
But then
That's
I mean,
interesting.
sometimes you get the It would depend on the port, really. If I remember correctly, it depended from port to port, the individual noises that they made. So the straight ones were horrible, though. And that one thing about a lot of the papers, and when people look at these, are like, oh, they're doing this research. The thing to think about is, why are we doing that research? And that's always the really interesting question. And a big part about, I think, this one is some of it comes back to when you work in acoustics, there's industrial design and there's acoustics. And industrial design will propose things that are acoustically not always a great idea. So working in a place like Samsung, industrial design is very much king, just like at a place like Apple. And so they'd get ideas proposed that had bent port tubes or, just very strange designs that were going to acoustically not be great. And so part of the motivation for these papers, while coming up with an optimal port flare, it's also saying, okay, don't do this, and here's why. So
kind of like, how much can I get away with?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you make a really good point. That's something that I've never thought about, and that's a great reason why it's great to have people with your kind of experience on, is to kind of mention those things and say, don't forget that sometimes design leads the research instead of the other way around, right? Like somebody comes up with this idea and it's like, is that actually going to work?
You can look at it at some of the other papers we did at Samsung of like, okay, at the time, way back when, there were some issues with some really big issues with latency between wireless speakers. And certain companies came up with, methods for reducing the latency between these loudspeakers. And Samsung was obviously also working on something. And so we had to do these papers for like perceptual delays between loudspeakers and how small of a difference we needed to get down to. And I get asked about that paper all the time, just because people still want to know, okay, how many samples difference can we have where it starts to become audible? And it's different on music than if you're doing like a really critical listening test. So that's a whole nother thing. And if you're wondering,
is that like
two samples.
Two sample? Okay. So is that, between a left and a right wireless speaker? Is that what you're talking about? Okay. Well, and what's really funny is I just got a set of speakers, or they're being delivered to me on Thursday, and it's a new JBL speaker, and it's a wireless set, right? And they were saying that, I think I'm kind of butchering this because I watched somebody else's video where they were talking about it, but I think what they were saying was that JBL recommends that you run them wired with an Ethernet cable because that's supposed to sound better. And I thought, well, why would that be? And I was thinking, does that have something to do with the wireless signal, the transmission time from one to the other? Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
That's what it is.
And I was even thinking, like, I was wondering, okay, and then I started thinking, is that something I could test? Measure one, measure the other, and just figure out the delay in time between the two, but then you got to relate that. Okay, like, is a millisecond good? 2 milliseconds? So I think you kind of maybe just answered that.
We're talking way lower than that.
Yeah, really.
Right. So in that paper, it was like, I'm saying 2 samples because that's a good target to shoot for, but realistically, it's a very hard target especially back then, it was a really, really hard target. If you look at the actual paper, I think we were somewhere, when people were adjusting for music over headphones and loudspeakers, it was a little different, but some people were over 100 microseconds. So we're not talking milliseconds. Milliseconds, you're already way beyond where you need to be, because you have to think about, okay, the time of arrival between my ears, depending on the size of your head, it's different, but that's something like 600 microseconds, right? Depending on my head's probably smaller than yours, so my ear locations are different.
I don't know. I think a lot of myself, so I got a pretty big head.
You got a pretty big head. Okay.
Well, I think isn't it like a kind of a rule of thumb is it's roughly like a foot for a millisecond. It's 13 inches, I think, for a millisecond or something like that. Somewhere around there. Yeah. Okay.
But we're talking about perceiving like a full left to right pan.
Left to right balance.
Or a drift, from
and that's lateral, right? I mean, so what about up and down? Is that a different ballgame altogether?
We actually are much worse at up and down, which is helpful in a lot of applications. That's actually pretty good. We did another paper while I was at Samsung about vertical perception. Adrian Celestinos did some really interesting work on that with HRTFs and trying to come up with a way that we could de-elevate some cinema loudspeakers to give people a sort of perceived de-elevation effect, which was a really hard problem. We did a lot of work to try to improve it, but basically Samsung created this Onyx cinema screen that was a hard screen that you couldn't put speakers behind. And in the cinema, traditionally, you'd have like a center channel that would go behind the screen, right? Because they're all perforated screens. You couldn't have this. So we had to come up with some algorithms and some methods to try to de-elevate that signal. So we did a lot of research in vertical perception, and it was really popular at the time. A lot of people were doing that work. I know Hyungkook Lee and a bunch of other people were as well. And we're not that good vertically. We were something like 15 degrees of perception vertically, and you notice a big difference. Whereas horizontally, it's like, 3 degrees, 2 degrees, anywhere between, I think, 3 to 5 degrees, depending on the person. You can, in a critical test, you can hear the difference. So
interesting.
Which is rough for VR applications.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can imagine. So did that wind up working? Were you able to put them up higher and
so we were
okay,
able to, the biggest problem I think was female voices and higher frequency content, really trying to pull that down. And we did create some de-elevation, but it's still not as far de-elevated. Thankfully, the ventriloquist effect, so the effect of hearing the person talking and seeing them talking, that helps way more than most processing does. So if you close your eyes, you might still perceive some of these as elevated, but we did create an algorithm that worked enough to be good for these cinemas, and the screens themselves were really cool. So I understand why we had to create this technology. So
were they huge?
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is,
you're talking cinema screen, so
yeah, they're like these modular panels, and I know Samsung was working on this for like their wall TV systems too. That this idea of like building walls of panels. So,
crazy.
But yeah, they're pretty cool. I know they have some in Texas and in Korea, and I forget where else. I'm sure more since I've left Samsung.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. You had like everything you said. I was just like, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. I was like trying to bucket it. Like I got to come back to that. Okay. So the other one that I'm also interested in is describing the audible effects of nonlinear loudspeaker distortion. And
this one's more my baby. This was totally my paper.
Okay.
So.
Right. So I did open it, and I caught the portions about the BL, the LEX, and the suspension asymmetries and things like that, and how that can drive nonlinearities. But I'm really more interested in the psychoacoustics testing that you perform. So I'm curious, what can you say? I mean, you have the floor. Okay. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So this paper was cool. This is largely inspired by Pascal Brunet, who I worked with at Samsung. And so he formerly worked at Listen with like Steve Temmie and a bunch of other folks there. But his specialty is in distortion and measuring distortion. So if you're interested in that, totally go back and look at some papers from Pascal. And then, of course, also Alex Foshvilo from Harman he's pretty much written everything about nonlinear distortion and perception of that. It's really great papers. Anyways, so going off of that. So the idea here was we were curious, especially working on small products. There is going to be distortion. There's going to be nonlinear distortion. It's audible. Think about cell phones and small audio products. You always have nonlinear distortion. In larger products, it's not as big of an issue, except when you're playing at really high volumes. But we weren't asking the question of if it was, if you could perceive it. We were asking the question of how did people perceive it, and on music content in particular. So what we did was we took a 5-inch driver that we knew when we drove it to high volumes, it would go ahead and start creating a lot of non-coherent distortion. So looking at that and doing measurements of it, we knew this driver was a good candidate for the paper. It would already produce these signals. So we went through and measured it in a clippal, parameterized it. So we had the large signal parameters. And so we had a linear model using small signal parameters, and then the nonlinear model using the clippal parameters. And we ran a whole bunch of different material. I think it was something like 80 songs through that. These songs I had intentionally picked because I thought they might produce distortion. categorized all the genres. There were like 9 different genres. I hate categorizing genres. It's one of the hardest things
Yeah,
to do.
it's either rock or classical, and that's kind of it.
That's okay. You're in Alabama, right?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot country.
Country, yeah, okay. Right.
Oh, for
I
me,
think I
it's
have
just
like
80s.
bluegrass and
For me,
country.
it's yeah. No, for me, it's 80s pop music, and that's it. Nothing else matters.
Sounds like a lot of people I've worked with.
I like these people already.
Right? Okay. I said audio geeks are great.
Right.
Anyways, so we went through, we processed all these files. We intentionally processed them at a level. It was like at a fixed level of 8% of non-coherent distortion. So we knew there was this level of distortion. So I would adjust basically how far the driver was going to be, how far it would be going out in each of the examples in that model to create that much distortion. It had to be realistic. I got rid of all the examples that like would never happen. So we went through, level match those tracks and then listened to all of them because obviously they weren't all playing back at the same volume. And then took a listen, found the ones that I thought created audible distortion. And then, so the initial test we ran had something like 30 tracks in it. And we did, people would select attributes. So basically I took the tone wheel, these guys over at Delta Sense Lab and a couple other researchers in Europe created this cool thing.
Yeah, that's
one of the, it's like
a
ITU
like a color wheel.
2399 if anyone wants to look that up.
I'll try to remember to throw that in here real fast. I've seen Sean Olive presented that in something we talked about once.
I used to work.
I think it's awesome.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah,
that's the other life before Samsung, and my current life, which is another whole thing. Anyways, so the tone wheel is a really cool thing. It's kind of like I know Nick Zakharoff compares it to like the coffee tasting wheel that they have for like the different flavors in coffee. Anyways, so going off of that, we had a couple categories for people to select, and then just free elicitation. So they'd write the difference they heard between the linear and the nonlinear model. I didn't tell them which one was which, obviously. It was just the linear was referenced, and then they were comparing it to another one. They were informed that the reference may not sound perfect, so they knew it wasn't like the original high-quality file. Anyways, so I got a whole bunch of text from something like 18 listeners at that point. Did a whole text analysis of that in the background, ran another study that was just to do a comparison of the linear and the nonlinear one, if they could hear the difference and which one sounded better. And then we did a third study, which was after I'd gone through and done all the text analysis and kind of broken it down into key terms, which ended up being some pretty obvious things like bass and vocals. People tended to hear, the distortion the most on those two things. And then they tended to not hear distortion on like TV and movie tracks. Anyways, in this third study, this was kind of one of the cooler things was they actually highlighted in a time on particular tracks where they heard certain attributes. So like if they heard, I believe the attributes, I think I wrote them down. Okay. Buzzing, clipping, roughness, shrillness, and modulation were the main attributes that I'd broken it down to after going through everybody's responses. Mm-hmm. I found the tracks that rated the worst in terms of hearing the distortion. And then they went through and selected in time where they heard it on each of the tracks. So I could kind of create heat maps from the listeners of where they had heard these issues, which was cool because you could go through and actually say, okay, I know one of them was like, there was like a Thomas Newman track with a whole bunch of really low bass in it. And I know on that track, like there was roughness throughout because this one really low grumbly bass was creating quite a ruckus from the distortion it was creating. And then some of the others, people would focus on the vocals or they'd highlight certain attributes, but it really tended to be people focused on bass, on vocals. And then things like for modulation, it was when multiple instruments came in, they'd start to highlight modulation. So it was kind of cool because it gave you sort of insight into not only what people were hearing, but where they were hearing it. And I haven't done a lot of studies like that in the past. The one weird question out of it was, so TV and movie tracks, which we tried in the earlier stages of the study, we didn't hear a lot of distortion in those. People didn't perceive it. And we were trying to figure out, okay, well, why would people hear it on vocals, but not hear it in speech? And we had a couple ideas that, the density of the track obviously contributed to it, but maybe also it was the crest factor. So with speech, the crest factors were going to be higher than it was going to be in most of the music content. So maybe that had something to do with it, or masking effects from the music. But the masking effects thing was confusing because it was like you'd think you would hear it less in music. Anyways, we never totally figured it out, but in general, people didn't notice it as much on speech or on TV content, which for some applications is great, like YouTube videos.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah, but for music stuff, people definitely tended to hone in on certain vocals. Oh yeah, the other thing was crescendos. When things got louder, people would tend to hear it. I'm trying to remember. Another one that was cool was dissonances. There was one track in particular, I think it was AC/DC. He gets to like a dissonant point, which I mean, the whole song's kind of dissonant. But anyways, he got to like, I think it was a major seventh that didn't resolve, and people tended to highlight that for some reason.
That's funny. Yeah, I saw that was one of your track lists, and I was like, that's awesome. Because most people, when we talk about audiophile music, it's stuff that I would never personally listen to. So I saw AC/DC on there. I was like, yes.
You have to be realistic about what people listen to. And I know I've had colleagues that use that all the time for listener fatigue because, well, it's fantastic for listener fatigue. If you can listen to that song like on loop and not be really exhausted and not want to listen to anything for like a day, then you're doing pretty good on your tuning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a track that they have a Long Way to the Top. And they had the bagpipes playing. I used to just drive around in my Ford Explorer with my 2 subwoofers, and I had some MB Court tweeters hanging off the A-pillars, blasting right to my eardrums, and I would have the windows rolled down like an annoying teenager, and I would just blare that, and it was just the bagpipes were, and I think that's probably why I can't hear as good as I used to be able to. That one song is probably what did it, That the tweeters right in my ears probably didn't help.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, most of the people I know that work in pro audio, there was something like that. Like I used to play noise music when I was in grad school, and I'm like, that's gonna haunt me someday.
It'll catch up to you one day, but hopefully by then they'll have. I saw some. This is kind of getting off topic. I saw like a week or two ago some MIT that they've come up with a way to like regrow the hair.
Yes, I saw that too. No, that is absolutely fascinating. There's been a lot of research in that for a while, especially on the defense departments, trying to figure it out for vets that have lost hearing because of noise exposure.
Right. That makes perfect sense. I didn't even think about that, but I saw the headline, and it's just one of those things where I'm like, I don't have enough time to read all this, but I read a little bit of it, and I thought, well, that's pretty darn cool. And I think they said they've been working on it. Right. Honestly, that's what I thought. I was like, I don't care about anybody else as long as I've got a chance.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a chance. So there's a few things. I actually was writing notes as you were telling me some of that information. What I did was I asked my patrons, I said, hey, do you guys have any questions for Beth? And there was one in particular. Let me go find it real fast. They were asking, actually a couple of them were kind of asking about the music that you like to listen to. So I guess that kind of bleeds into, how did you select the tracks for this? I mean, how did you come up with AC/DC? And did anybody laugh at you when you said that?
There's something really important about critical listening tracks is that you don't want to use the songs that you like. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you use stuff you like, you're going to learn to hate it because you have to listen to it all the time. I'm very careful about the music I select. I mean, not saying that I hate AC/DC. It's just not way up there on my list of things that I love.
That was the next question.
You were like, and end meeting.
Click. Forget this.
No, but it's people probably think that, I have like horrible music taste at work because we listen to, like stuff that probably a lot of people don't like it sing. And that's because, working at Harman, working at Samsung, coming from that tradition, like we have certain tracks that you just go to. James Taylor, Tracy Chapman Fast Car.
Everybody uses that. Yeah.
Steely
Are you familiar? What about the Spanish Harlem?
Oh yeah, Spanish Harlem, of course. I think that was actually in that distortion test somewhere in there.
Okay.
It had to be.
Yeah, everybody uses that. And so Now, I'm in car audio, and that's one of the test tracks in car audio as well for a sound quality system. And everybody's like, I hate this song. But it's
Yeah.
good if you know what to listen for. It's a good track. It has certain attributes like the stand-up bass,
Totally.
you know.
And everybody kind of has their go-tos. Like Sean Olive always went to Bird on a Wire. Jennifer Warren's, that is like his go-to. When we were doing headphone tests, like that was sometimes he would just listen just to that track before we would run a test or anything and be like, okay.
He calibrated himself.
Yeah, exactly. And so like there's a Steely Dan track and a obviously Fast Car. I usually listen to that. I also have like a Norah Jones track. Not because it's like perfect, because it's not perfect.
Because
Feeling the Same Way has like a vocal exciter on it, and it's like a little edgy. And so I always listen for that edginess, because if it's not edgy, something's off, or if it's too edgy. But yeah, I mean, we have everybody has their own huge lists of tracks that they go through, and a lot of times they're learned from other people, and that's the cool thing about the field, is like sort of learning over time what these tracks are. And I mean, unfortunately, like I don't dislike Steely Dan. Steely Dan's kind of like AC/DC for me. Like I don't hate it, I don't love it, but I've had at every single job, including the studio, because I worked at the studio Asia was recorded at, and so I got to hear that almost every day.
Oh man,
you get burned out on it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I used to like this song, and it sucks.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you did like it, it's like.
But In Sync, I can never get tired of In Sync. So maybe that's just me.
Yeah, that's just you.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it is what it is.
Though, like that you bring in newer tracks. And I know that, you know, we all have like, okay, here's my catalog. And a lot of it's like from the 90s, or for me, it's 90s, some stuff from 2000s.
Right.
But bringing in new tracks, because that's what people are listening to. So even if it's like super compressed, even if it's not necessarily music you like, if you're evaluating a sound system you're going to sell to people, you have to listen to the music they're listening to. So I've always been an advocate of that.
Yeah. My daughter, I was demoing some speakers last week, and my daughter came up there and she started playing Olivia Rodrigo. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. I wasn't until then. I'd heard the name, I think. But I was like, I actually kind of like this song. And I was thinking, it sounds like the Haley girl from Paramore. And I said, you need to listen to Paramore. So I introduced her to Paramore. She's like, oh, I see it. And not the exact same, but they similar qualities, you know?
Yeah, so, no, I could totally see that.
Yeah. So, hey, I appreciate you bailing me out there. All right. Anyway, so you guys are recording the speaker, you know, in whatever you're trying to do, right? Like, so this nonlinear distortion testing, you were recording the sound coming from the speaker.
That was all simulations. So that was all models of the loudspeaker. That was not recording the speaker. Port testing was actually recording.
Okay.
Andre made a crazy number of recordings for that test. That was a lot of work for him. So,
yeah, I bet.
Because we had all the different models, the ones that were the port tubes he used, the port tubes he didn't use, all of it got recorded. So yeah, along with all the console simulations. But if you worked in simulations, as Andre does, like a lot of time is spent waiting for simulations to happen. Because even with a super powerful computer, they can take a very long time. So you know, in between running simulations.
So how does that work? How do you simulate nonlinear distortion into an audio track? Like, I mean, is that done through console?
So
like I know Clipple has the oralizer, or they used to. I don't know if they still do, but
so basically, Pascal, my colleague, he basically just wrote a way. So we had like a linear model, which was just a model he created in MATLAB, and we could run audio into that model to create what it would sound like with a linear model. And then he would use the parameters for that large signal one, create a model in MATLAB, and then we could run audio into that, change the parameters to make it have more or less excursion. And then that would help us get that level of distortion that we were trying to get. So it was basically just all models that we made in MATLAB in that particular test.
That's cool. Yeah, I started, so I dabble in MATLAB just for my job. But I'm like, I gotta get my hands on that model. I'm coming to work for Samsung for a week. I'll be a busboy or something. Just snatch that model right up. Anyway, let's see here. So those nonlinear distortions,
Mhm.
what about IMD? Right. So we've got harmonic, we've got IMD, we've got multi-tone distortion. Did you all of those, was that included? Like,
Well,
how does
okay,
that
so
fit into the scale?
basically, so NCD, non-coherent distortion, is just a measure of nonlinear distortion, which is not unrelated to intermodulation distortion. So intermodulation distortion is also included in that.
Right.
So
Okay.
we're not. It's just a particular
You're not
measure, and
segmenting them, right?
you can look back at the papers that Pascal and Steve did to get more specifics on like how you calculate that measure.
Yeah.
And I think Listen probably has a measure for that in the software, though I haven't checked in a long time. So
Okay.
Mhm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Let's see
And you'll
here.
probably
So
get
I asked you.
comments.
So I asked you about your favorite song, and you said it was AC/DC and Steely Dan. So that's good. Um,
I can't say I have a favorite song. That's like impossible.
I don't either. Yeah, people were like, "What's
Or
your
like
favorite song?" And I'm like,
go-to
"It depends
testing
on what."
songs I have. But what? Sorry, what was
Yeah,
that?
well, it just depends on the day, right? I mean, my favorite
Oh,
song, it varies, and that's a really cool thing about, you were talking about newer music, newer, not necessarily new, like, current, but even newer to you. Like you'll
Mhm.
pull up streaming music now, and I'll just say, "Hey, Apple, you've curated a playlist. Just go play this," and it'll come across a song that I've not heard, or maybe I haven't heard in 10 or 15 years. And I'm like, that sounds pretty good, and then
Yeah.
it'll make it in my list. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's the cool thing about streaming music nowadays. It's so easy to find new stuff, but at the same time, there's so many opportunities. You overwhelm it's like getting that Netflix. You're like, what? I want to
Yeah.
watch something for 10 minutes, and then you spend 10 minutes scrolling, and you haven't watched anything. You're like, okay, well, I guess I'm done here.
Yeah, it's good and bad. I mean, it's obviously better than just getting whatever was given you on the radio or going into a CD shop and buying something and being like, okay, I know I like the one song, and then being like,
Right.
the rest is garbage.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done that with a few. Yeah. Third Eye Blind was one of those albums that I did that on, but I don't know if you know about that, but
I know about it
good old
now.
days. Now you do. I meant, I don't know if you know
I
about
did not own that
Third
album,
Eye
but I
Blind.
remember.
Okay.
I
Sorry.
might have been dragged to a concert of theirs a long time ago. Yes, as a teenager.
Okay.
Mhm.
How did that
Yeah.
go? You were dragged to it, so maybe not that much fun.
It was first thing in the morning because it was like for the Today Show, I think. And I
Really?
waited in line. I had a friend that really liked them. Yeah.
Are you still friends with that person?
No.
I
But
think I
that's
understand
not
why.
why.
Oh, that's not okay. We'll save that for another one. Sorry. So I'm looking through some of these questions on here. Let's see here. So Michael has asked your favorite way to
Oh, that's
listen to music, headphones or speakers.
speakers.
What now? Why is that? I'm curious.
I mean, I worked in headphone research for a
Yeah,
very long time, but hearing music out loud is where it's at, and
I'm the
the
same way.
bass is a big part of it. You have to feel it in your body and not just in your ears.
Right.
So that's why I love music out loud. Which
Well,
I live in a condo. Maybe my neighbors may not love that, but
yeah.
the
Who
same
cares what
speakers
they
have
think?
good amount of bass, as you know. So
Hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the tone control
Exactly.
is coming. I promise. By the way.
Okay. That's good to
I'm sure
know.
that would be the next comment. Is the tone control coming? So
Yeah, that
yes.
speaker, I fired it up, just the one, and I was like, because Joe and Tell had already reviewed one of them, and he was telling me, he's like, man, these things put out a ton of bass, and I'm like, whatever, man, they're 6.5-inch woofers, they're gonna put out so much bass, and then I fired it up, right? Yeah, I fired it up, and I was thinking, good lord, and they don't distort. I mean, you got some smarts built into it to keep things in check, but they don't distort, and then when you get all three of them, it's ridiculous, and
I mean,
that's something.
naturally they don't distort very much. There isn't much in terms of limiting and stuff going on in that speaker. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, well, they're
you
pretty
can crank it.
impressive.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
If
definitely did.
your family can tolerate it, you can crank it.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, like I walked upstairs and had them playing downstairs, and it's not like I was there, but I mean the bass. It was just like, holy crap, dude! Out of some 6.5-inch woofers. I'm coming from the side of things where 6.5-inch woofers just aren't supposed to do that, right? So,
Mhm.
and then
Like
and then they
what size of
do.
subwoofers did you have in that Ford Explorer?
Oh, I had a JL Audio 13 W7. Yeah. But the car before, not before that, but the car right now I've got a JL Audio 12W6, but the car before that let me tell you, that thing had two 15-inch subwoofers, infinite baffle, in the trunk wall. I had my firewall cut out to fit in 10-inch mid bass and the kick panels. So they were running 80 hertz to 300 hertz, and the subs took over from there. Then I had BMS. Are you familiar with the BMS company? They make pro
No.
audio stuff. So they make
Okay.
a pro audio coaxial, and I had that in the A pillar aimed at my head. That car was ridiculous. It was
Okay, so
tons of
yeah,
fun.
so coming from that side of things, I mean, yeah, I will
Yeah,
say with the Sing Cell, like the bass is killer. We've done tests in our lab, and you really need at least like a 15-inch woofer to
yeah,
add extra low bass that's noticeable, and really bigger than that. Like we've tried it with two 15-inch woofers, and with a really good subwoofer, you probably could hear the difference, but it's
right.
not as much as you would think.
Yeah, I
So,
can't remember what when I reviewed that speaker. I can't remember how low it got, but I want to say it was like in the 30, down to 30
mhm,
hertz in my room, like no problem.
yep,
And I was
no
thinking
problem.
that's ridiculous because I'd measured it in the room. That's ridiculous.
It's the
And I
size of a
think that was
basketball.
actually just with two of them at that time.
Mhm.
So yeah, and there was plenty of bass, bass for days. Actually, that's a good thing to talk about is that sing. And I didn't at all intend to bring this up, but when you and I talked about that before well, as I was reviewing, and I had questions about the design of that. You were kind of talking about how it was a cardioid pattern and some of the beam steering that went into that.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk some about that for the audience? Just so the beam
Oh,
steering
sure.
and cardioid, I think they would really be interested in kind of understanding what's going on with that speaker.
Okay, I don't have a cell right next to me like I did in the demo, but
Yeah,
I'll
I'll try
try
to
to
find a
describe
picture and
it.
put it up here so people can see it. Yeah, I'll throw one
Okay,
in at the
cool.
edit.
So in the middle of the SingCell Alpha, there's what we call the Triphone, and in that area you've got three horns, and each of those horns has a mid range and a tweeter that are coaxial. So you've got the mid range, the tweeter. I have to move this over here. The mid range, the tweeter. Okay, and so basically each of those creates a cardioid pattern. I don't know why I keep going to this side of the screen here.
That's all
Okay.
right. Hold on.
Cardioid
I'll
pattern,
let me
cardioid
see if I can.
pattern,
Hey, there we
cardioid
go.
pattern.
Look at that.
So
Now we can see.
basically you have three cardioids that are created by each of the horns. And by having these really wide waveguides on the triphone, it allows you to either move sound sources around, or if the sound sources are moving for something dynamic, then it's a very smooth transition because of that design. And so the high frequencies don't dive bomb off as you walk off axis like they would with a traditional, loudspeaker. Mhm. That's the
Yeah.
basic idea with the Triphone. Really cool design. Obviously, we do have a beamformer in there as well,
Hmm.
and it's there are only three horns, so it's not a super precise beamformer, but for what it can do, it's pretty awesome.
Now,
Mhm.
are all three sides of that active at the same time, or is it
It's
you're
going to
using two
depend
at a time?
on they will all be outputting something, but some of them might be different in phase to what's going on in front. It all depends
Hmm.
on where the source is located around the cell. So,
Right. Yeah, because you can take the
mhm,
app and you can basically steer the sound to be wherever you want.
mhm.
Yeah,
And
that
then
thing's pretty cool.
also because the cells themselves adapt to the room, and you have they figure out where they are in the room. You have your own
Right.
spatial setting. That means you can rotate the sound field too, so wherever the front of your room is, you can rotate to create that in the app, which is a really unique thing in terms of consumer audio, and I think it's really looking forward to what spatial audio will be. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question too. Is so how did you wind up coming over and working for Sing? Was I mean just the genesis
Great
of that?
question. Actually, I was at AES, and I was at an after party at AES. Met a guy who had been composing music for Sang, and heard about the company. And I'd gotten like a LinkedIn message months and months before from Fruz, who at the time was the CTO. And yeah, I lived in West LA as I do now, and I'd been commuting up to Samsung in Valencia, which is not super close, but not super far. And I was like, oh, it might be cool to work somewhere over here. I chatted with the guys. I met with Chris Kyriakakis, who's awesome, and he's a professor at USC as well as works at Sing. And then I also met with Fruz and some other folks there. just chatted about what they were doing. And, I know there's what you have seen, and then there's what is coming in the future. And that's the really exciting part about the company, is kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
there's, being able to play Spotify and AirPlay and, your 5.1 stuff, but then looking forward to what we can do with spatial audio and what we can do with interactive audio. And I think that's where the really cool part of Sing lies. And I'm hoping that more of that comes out in the coming year. It'll definitely be out next year, following year. So
Okay.
we have a huge roadmap of everything that's coming, but obviously I can't say too much about that because
I was wanting to ask, but I wasn't going to. Yeah. Well, I mean, just the fact that looking at the fact that you're working there, Chris is working there, and some of the other names who I went and checked out, when you see the employees that are working for Sing, you're thinking, all right, well, they're basically building an empire over there. I mean, they've got some really smart people, right? You don't go just hire really smart, sharp people and then do nothing with them. So I'm curious to see what you guys are going to come up with over there. That'll be pretty cool.
No, our audio team's amazing. And yeah, I mean, we have Ryan Mihelich from, he was at Apple and also at Harman, who did all the transducer designs, system engineering. Nathan Hoyt, who works with him, who's a test and measurement engineer and a system engineer. And then we've got some great guys in Europe, Lasse and Matthias. So Lasse Vetter and Matthias Kronlacher. I'm sure I screwed up his last name, but I think that's what it is. Matthias used to work at Harman. He worked on the Lexicon SL1, that crazy speaker. Yes, we talked about this, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of spatial audio, very unique speaker. So if you don't know what that is, look it up. SL1, I think, is the name. If I screw that up, you'll probably figure out
something like that. I know exactly which one you're talking
about.
There
haven't been many Lexicon speakers, so it should be easy to figure out.
Right.
And then Lasse he's a kind of machine learning audio geek who's worked on some really amazing stuff in the app world and run his own sort of headphone Instagram company, which I'm losing it right now. I don't remember what it was, but so great team. Awesome audio folks. And also a design driven company. It's been a really unique experience coming from the research side because, being in a startup, you do everything. And that really means everything. So when there are fires, all boots are on the ground. And when things are going well, then we can get back into our normal domains. But we're right now, just so many things are going on, and we're just working on growing as much as we can. So yeah.
Well, that's good. It's better to be busy than bored, at a job, because if you're bored, that means that's a lot of bad things usually are associated with that. Yeah. So I do have to ask, and you don't have to answer.
Okay.
What is the coolest speaker or your favorite loudspeaker then, since you're a loudspeaker person, that you've heard outside of Sing? Or maybe just your favorite experience. If it's been when you were younger and you went into an audio store, can you think of something that just really kind of sticks with you? I'll put you on the spot.
Okay. In terms of speakers, let me think. I'll
give you mine while you're thinking.
Okay. I do have an answer. It's probably kind of predictable, but I do remember being at Harman. And when they were first doing the prototypes for the M1, and that was a really cool experience, hearing those for the first time. So that was the first thing that came to mind. And obviously it's because, I got to help work on it and be more involved with the guys that were working on the system side for it. So I saw it evolve over time. And I think that's part of why that one's kind of special to me. And it was a pretty amazing speaker. Although some people, have some issues with the compression driver and blah, blah, whatever. I really like that speaker. And most of the things Revel has done too. But yet again, I also saw it from a more intimate side of having, the guys that worked on it and what they did and helping out with that.
Yeah.
So
no, that's really cool. Well, so I got to review the M2 back, I guess it was last
Did I say
summer.
M1? I totally meant M2. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's Well, I thought maybe it was just like a pre-production model. It's all right.
Yeah, just the pre-production of the M2.
So it was before the M2. Well, there had to be an M1, right? I mean, that was
Oh
the one that
man,
nobody knew about. Oh yeah, the M2.
this
So
is what COVID has done to my brain the past
that's
couple
all
of
right.
years.
I think you're managing
The
just fine. It's
M1,
all right. So the M2, and then I
M2.
reviewed the 4367 recently. Both of those are fantastic speakers, but the M2 really surprises me when you talk about the horizontal spread is great, but the vertical spread is really, really good too. I was really surprised to see that out of a compression driver horn combo.
Yeah.
Normally, especially just the way it looks, it doesn't look as, I guess it is more square than it is rectangular. Most compression driver horns you see are more rectangular, so their vertical window is more limited, or maybe it's more jagged, or both, than the horizontal. But that M2 had a really special horn in it. I like that thing a lot.
Yeah. Okay, so what was yours
Psycho.
again? I totally was rambling.
No. That's all right. I was just going to buy you time. Mine was the experience at Hi-Fi Buys, but it wasn't even the speakers. I was listening to a set of crazy expensive like Wilson something or another, which I don't even know if I would buy them now. But at the time, I was just really impressed by them because they had big, I think they had $50,000 amplifiers. I don't remember which one they were. But the coolest part to me was the salesman there. He was not like a typical salesman. He actually said, "Hey, walk around the room and see what you think." And then I said, "Oh, the bass doesn't sound right here." And this is a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Yeah, that's because you're standing in the null." And he dude knew his stuff, and he started going into techno stuff. And I was like, this dude, this is the kind of salesman that you want. Normally we think of salesmen as maybe they're just trying to sell you something, so they're not going to talk about the pros and the cons of the stuff. But this dude was on point. That's Hi-Fi Buys in Nashville. If they want to send me a free speaker or a pair would be cool. No. Or a Macintosh amplifier. I'm gonna keep digging. I think every video I make, I say something about Macintosh amplifiers, and I'm hoping one of these days they'll just be like, "All right, just send this guy, just send him a broken one. I'll take a broken one. I don't even care anymore."
I mean, we used to use those at the studios when we were trying to impress people. We'd pull one out and set up some, God, I don't remember. We had some very random speakers for consumer audio, but probably wasn't something I would particularly like today. But the amps were great.
Yeah, man, not a problem at all with those. Let me check here real fast. See, okay, here's one. I'm going to put it on the screen because it's going to be hard for me to read out loud. But this is from Catherine Lugg in the middle here. Really geeky question. I've been struck by the variable quality of recording engineers. So for classical music, Wilma Cozart-Fine's work, I'm not familiar with that person, from the 50s, 60s, remain dazzling. And DG has been consistently stellar in their offerings, but I have a few recordings that are literally unlistenable. One is so distorted, I swear the engineer was drunk, stoned when recording. Whom do you respect when it comes to audio recording?
Oh my God, that's a really hard question.
That's a good question. See, for me, I'd say the dude that produced Def Leppard and produced The Cars and a bunch of other stuff, Mutt Lange. So, but that's because that's the only person I can think of off the top. I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, no. Oh man, that one's really rough. I wish you'd sent me that one in advance. And
Catherine's coming in hot with those questions. Okay.
Let's see. I mean, well, because I did work on the studio side, it's hard for me sometimes because I see people from not only the technical perspective, but also who they were as people. So I'm
I get that. Yeah. Make good music, but probably not a cool person.
Yeah, totally. But I mean,
or vice versa.
Yeah, I think yet again, I'm going to go back to thinking about when I worked at the Village and the guys that worked with T-Bone. While some of them kind of fell into a little bit of magical thinking, they did had a really solid process. So Jason Warmer, who worked with T-Bone, he was an amazing engineer. I have not seen him in over a decade, but I had a lot of respect for the stuff he worked on. So I think he worked on a lot of country and bluegrass and things like that. And made some great recordings as well. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many people, and I don't want to. Yeah,
I get you. But it's a good question, though. It is a really good question. So you talk about maybe people are. You said the magic. I think is what you said. Somebody was more into magic.
So there's kind of there's sort of a almost religious thing in the mixing studio of the process and the gear that's used and creating this sound. You have to use
synergy.
APIs in your Neve, and it has to be this signal flow, and that's how it works. So I think that's kind of what I meant about the magic, and I don't necessarily mean that in a derogatory way. It's just part of their
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And working on the consumer side, it's not that way as much. Like it's much more like, okay, we need signal processing. We create and add
We'll just go
signal
get it.
processing to our flow, and it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be an API at a Neve or an SSL or whatever your particular thing is. But I think on the music engineering side, there's a lot more of like preference for particular gear and signal flows, and I get it. It's just a different way of doing things. Mhm.
So do you still dabble in that side of
Oh yeah,
things?
totally. No, I
Yeah.
I still do some recording, but just for fun. And I mean, my
Mhm.
background was all like computer music and composition, and somehow I
Right.
came about this route in a very circuitous way. But yeah, I in general, like the music side is still at my core, and I think that's part of why I came to sing. Is like we are long term going to be more into music as well as more experimental forms of art and expression and things like that. So
Yeah.
mhm.
Well, and I think that's cool that you've taken your passion for audio and a tech minded person like yourself, and you've just kind of merged them together. And I think
Mhm.
it's cool for people to see that, like to see that there's things that you can do in the audio field as a career. You can actually make a living doing something you're really passionate about and you enjoy.
Mhm. Oh yeah,
So
I mean, I had no idea that this job existed, and so when you asked me like, oh, it's kind of a career day type of thing, and I
yeah.
can just tell you, and it's like when I was in school, like I remember, so I went to Brown for undergrad. It's a great school, but I don't think it was really my style at all.
Hmm.
Even though it was very rigorous and Ivy League fanciness, whatever.
Hmm.
But I majored in computer music and this other like kind of critical theory degree. And I remember going to like the career office because I was trying to get an internship, and the guy was like, "Is that a real major, computer music?" And I was like,
Wow.
"Hmm, okay,
Ouch.
maybe I should think about some things." But it's one of those things where I went to grad school. So I went to CalArts for grad school, which is the kind of polar opposite of the other world, and it was a much more self-directed type of education, which people like me do well at, and a lot of other people do as well. And yeah, I explored all kinds of things, built instruments, made music, wrote music. And then I went kind of back to more technical things because the interesting thing is like in my background, like I have done a lot of technical stuff, but I've also done more creative stuff. And the fact that you can pull both of those together,
Right.
it surprised me, but it kind of makes sense where I've ended up and how I've ended up on this path. So mhm.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And I think, if I had realized that this could be, a career, maybe at some point when I was going to college, I would have looked at doing something like audio engineering. But I
Mhm.
was in my second or so year of college and I just needed insurance. So I was like, okay, calculus sounds fun. I'll just take calculus, like whatever gets me through another semester. Because I wasn't heavy into BMX and I wasn't good at it and I wrecked a lot. So I needed the insurance. So
Oh, man.
yeah, no, it's just a couple separated shoulders, broken elbow, broken ankle. Like I said, not great,
Yeah.
but I loved it. Um, but
I just
no,
break things walking now, so I feel for you.
well, that's not good.
No.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Don't break your
Well,
ankle walking a 17-pound dog. That's my advice to people. Yeah.
so did you step off a curb wrong?
I like stepped on a crack in the sidewalk. This is the second time I broke my ankle in 2 years. So
Oh
yeah, I think some
wow,
of those injuries, kind of like your BMX injuries, I think I had those for other sports when I was younger, and they come back to
yeah,
haunt you.
yeah. So like,
So
is Sing being like, look, we're not buying that you broke your ankle again? Is that what they're saying? Like, you're like, I can't come into work. I broke my ankle. And they're like, nah, you're going to come in.
yeah, I was given demos in a boot and on crutches and stuff. I was helping out, stepping
That's
up for the
awesome.
team.
That's
They
awesome.
helped carry the cells were kind of heavy. They helped carry stuff while I had a
I
broken
got
ankle.
you.
Now it's
Yeah.
done, but
Oh, well, I mean, that was actually something I was thinking about too. Is do you do a lot of traveling for your job, or is it
um,
most of it at
it,
home?
right now because we're kind of in another funding round. I
Hmm.
travel more, but it depends. If at Samsung, I'd say I traveled a little bit less, maybe a couple trips a year. Seeing sometimes we have kind of one offs that you have to go and help to
Yeah,
support the team. So mhm.
yeah. Do you ever travel anywhere that like you're super stoked on when you get to go there, or
Oh yeah,
is
some
it
of
all
them.
like,
I mean, we got to go to Copenhagen last year. That was really cool. That was
oh, that's awesome.
amazing. I'd never been. So we had some meetings over there. Yeah, and I mean, we go to New York often too, and I don't mind New York. I grew up outside Philly, so
Did you?
it's pretty
Okay,
cool. Hmm.
cool. So you went from Philly to California for college, or did you get there some
I
other way?
went Philadelphia, Rhode Island, and then out to California, to
Okay,
LA. And I've stayed ever
cool.
since.
Well, good. It's good weather out there. I'd like to go out there, but I can't afford it. Those houses out there are insane.
Yeah, no, I can't afford a house out here.
Yeah, it's nuts. And it's getting crazy here too. I mean, I'm in Alabama where land is relatively cheap, but it's getting expensive here too. So I think everybody's feeling it.
Yeah, it's messed up.
Yeah, it's not good. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I will we're about an hour and I don't want to take all of your time. But man, I honestly I really enjoyed that you came on. I enjoyed talking with you. And if you're
Yeah,
up
switch
for it, maybe we can do
times.
this again. Yeah. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
totally. And anybody else, I mean, a lot of those folks I mentioned throughout the thing, I'm sure would love to talk to you. So mhm.
Yeah. Well, cool.
If you
Well,
want
I
more details
appreciate
about
it.
Cool Foods and whatnot.
Oh yeah. Well,
It's
I mean,
not my
I'll
area
tell
of
you that
expertise, sorry.
the thing is, like, I have all these, and I have a lot of like when I never fancy myself as like a loudspeaker engineer. I'm a reviewer. I'm more like a test engineer, right? Like I can put tests together. I can look at the data. I can analyze it. But there's obviously always questions that I don't have answers to. And then that's when I reach out to folks as yourself, people in the industry who have that experience that can help me make sense of it. So I'm
Mhm.
not telling people the wrong thing, like, oh, this does X, Y, or Z because of this, and then find out 5 years later I was completely off base. Um,
Mm.
but there's always questions that I have, and I wish I understood more of it. It's just trying
I
to find the
mean, the
time in
more
the
you
day.
know, the more you feel like you don't know. So
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for real. Like when I've talked to you, I had Renee Christensen on last week, who's a console guy, and he gave a not a lecture, but kind of a discussion about um, where am I going here? Cones, speaker cones, and breakup modes and resonances and things like that, and how beaming works, lobing works, etc.
Mhm.
And I thought I understood it until he sent me the package that he was going to brief, and he had all the math equations on there, and I was like, "Good Lord, I don't know anything." So, it's like, but it's cool. I mean, because I think it's really neat for people to understand, and honestly, my hope is that younger people will see these kind of videos and think, oh, that's something I can actually do, or oh, that's how math is applied to music and audio. It's not just this mysterious thing that you plug a speaker up into an outlet, or not an outlet. I don't do that. But up to an amplifier, and all of a sudden you've got music. Like there's
You will
engineering
learn
behind it.
something if you plug it into an
Yeah,
outlet.
no.
It's not a good
I
thing.
well, I fed a subwoofer one time. I went to feed it. I think I went to feed the subwoofer 2 volts directly, and I forgot that I had the clipple tied into an amplifier. So I sent 2 volts out, and then it went to the amplifier, and it was just boosted up by like some crazy number because the gain was maxed all the way up. And I had the subwoofer in my hand. I was holding it because I wanted to see what the free air resonance was to make sure my enclosure wasn't doing anything, right? And it goes brrr, and shook my arm all to bits, and then I couldn't get the voice coil to move ever again. So that was a rough call to the manufacturer to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to pay for that one. But he was like,
Yeah.
I'll split it with you. I was like, thanks. So, never do that again. Anyway. All right. Well, once again, I appreciate it. And I will be in touch. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. If anybody has any comments or questions, please leave them below. I'll just throw up your LinkedIn. So if you start getting a lot of weird hits on your LinkedIn, it's probably some of the
I
people
gotta update
watching this
my
video.
picture. It's like 10 years old. I think there's like a
You
digi
look the
design
same.
inbox in the background.
You
Thank
you
you.
look the same. Yeah. So
All
you
right, I'll
haven't
take
aged a bit in
that.
10 years. There you go. Perfect.
Sweet.
All right. All right. Well, have a good one.
All right, you too. Thanks.